snacks, and we make it up to the top of the falls. And it was beautiful, don't get me wrong. But that hike, it was a difficult hike to begin with, and it was made so much more difficult by the fact that we were completely unprepared. Well, the Christian life can be considered a journey or a hike, if you will, with the ultimate destination being the New Jerusalem. And we can hit some difficult terrain, right? Some steep slopes and some deep valleys, and we need to be prepared. The journey can be bumpy because trials come to everyone. Perhaps you've been through some already. Maybe you're going through some right now. Or if not, they will come. Health crises, job loss, relational struggles, marriage struggles. As believers, we will not be protected from this. As Jesus tells us in John 16, in this world you will have trials, you will have tribulation. Right? God's word tells us that trials are a reality in our lives. As believers, we're not immune, we're not protected. So if we know they're coming, we need to be ready so that they don't hit us like the steep slopes of Yosemite and catch us off guard and unprepared. We could struggle more than necessary when these trials come if we're not prepared. Right? God has given us resources that we need to tap into, our spiritual water and granola bars. And most importantly, if we're unprepared, when trials strike, we're going to miss an opportunity to glorify God. As followers of Christ, our response must look different when trials come. We can't let trials and tribulations derail our faith, cause us to lose hope, to keep us from being productive for the kingdom. Your unbelieving family, neighbors, friends are going to be watching you intently as you navigate trials. If you're a follower of Christ, if you've been out there about your belief, about where your hope lies, then you're going to be on center stage when the rubber meets the road. Are you going to cave in and crumble and give up hope? Or are you going to have that peace that transcends understanding? Are you going to have a response that's different, that's counterintuitive, that makes people sit up and take notice? What a great opportunity we have to glorify God in trials if we're prepared. Well, in our passage, we're going to see David navigate a great trial, and we can see what we can learn. Now, we know David's not a perfect man, but he's called a man after God's own heart because he picks himself up and he tries to do what's right. So let's look at our passage. We're going to focus on the second half, starting in verse 13, but just recap a little bit about what's happened so far. So that's verse 13, but let's look at chapter 14. We start with Absalom's sister Tamar is raped by her brother Amnon, and then Absalom kills him. In chapter 14, Absalom returns to Jerusalem, but he's not fully reconciled to David. And then in our passage in chapter 15, we see that Absalom is a consummate politician now. He's got something up his sleeve. And you can turn to chapter 15 or just follow along with me. We see in verse 1 where he's getting horses and chariots, right? Status symbols. He's positioning himself at the gate, a very visible place. And he's ingratiating himself to the people that walk by, falsely inquiring of them and their well-being, right? He's manipulating the people. He's cunning and deceptive. He's using it for personal ambition and personal gain. In verse 6, it says, Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. And we know that in Hebrew, the word heart is the mind, right? Absalom deceived the people of Israel. And in verse 7, he asks David if he can go and pay a vow to the Lord in Hebron. And we get a hint that this is probably not the most honorable of intentions, right? It's been over 4 years. And David allows him to go and says, go in peace, which is a little ironic because he's actually going there to plot, to usurp David's throne. So let's pick up our passage starting in verse 13. And the conspiracy grew strong, right? Absalom's conspiracy has grown strong, and the people with Absalom kept increasing. And a messenger came to David saying, "The hearts of the men of Israel have gone after Absalom." Then David said to all his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, "Arise and let us flee, or else there will be no escape for us from Absalom. Go quickly, lest he overtake us quickly and bring down ruin on us and the city, and strike the city with the edge of the sword." Wow, things are really messed up. Right? David's own son is trying to overthrow him and take the throne. David, the warrior king, the hero, the slayer of Goliath, is on the run. He's fleeing. He's running for his life. And we can miss the magnitude of this trial. But David is in a terrible situation. Not only has he lost his throne, but he's lost his home, his livelihood, his family is in danger, the city that he loves is in peril. This is a terrible situation. But before we dig into how David deals with this massive setback, with this trial, let's look at how did he get here to begin with. And when we step back, we have a hint of that in verse 1 where it says, "after this." So what's happening in chapter 15 is tied to what happened earlier, right? All the way back to David's sin with Bathsheba. And we can follow that along, couple that with his unwillingness to deal with the situation at hand, right? Not taking action with Absalom, and then giving into feelings versus what's right, like we learned last week. So we need to make the obvious statement that when it comes to trials, the best way to be prepared is to not get into them in the first place. Now, I'm not saying that every trial is something that we can control, but there are times, many times, that the trials that befall us are of our own making. Can we agree with that? Right? The crises that we have in our lives are sometimes those that we have brought upon ourselves. So much like what we see with David in our passage, where possible, avoid the pitfalls that lead to crises. And that's point 1 on your outline, is avoid the pitfalls that lead to crises. Look at the cascade of events that have set this in motion, right? Sexual sin with Bathsheba, not dealing with Amnon and the rape of Tamar, not fully reconciling with Absalom. And now in chapter 15, we see where David is still not dealing with the situation. He's passive about what Absalom is up to. I mean, he had to have known, right? If he hadn't seen it himself, someone must have told him, because Absalom is not in a corner. He's at the gate. He's a very visible place. He has horses and chariots. People will know what's going on, and word should have gotten back to David, most certainly would have gotten back to David. And it's been going on for 4 years. So if we bucket the issues that we see in our passage, we can see some common themes to what are the pitfalls that can happen. Sin, right? Passivity, not taking action when we should, or lack of discernment, allowing yourself to be fooled, like David allowing Absalom to go to Hebron in the first place. So sometimes the best defense is a good offense. Avoid getting into crises in the first place. It reminds me of Proverbs chapter 14, verse 1. Proverbs 14:1 says, "The wisest of women builds her house, but folly with her own hands tears it down." We can bring trials on ourselves and our family with our own hands, right? We can build up our house with our own hands, and then we can tear it down with our own hands. We need to take measures to make sure that sin doesn't entangle us and lead to crises. And we need to fix things while we still can, right? Fix situations while we still can, particularly with our children. We have a God-given responsibility to correct and direct our kids. Think about 1 Samuel and Eli, right? We need to take action while we still can, before things get to the crisis point. And then we need to be wise and discerning in our decision-making. I don't want to belabor the point or restate the obvious other than to say, where possible, make every effort to avoid getting into crises in the first place. But there are situations, there are crises, there are trials that are unavoidable. Illnesses strike, financial reversals, relationships struggle, marriages struggle through no doing of our own. And as we discussed, this is a very difficult time for David. This is a big crisis. So hopefully you're convinced that you need to be prepared when the big crises of life hit. But our temptation is to apply these to only the big crises and let the everyday crises get the better of us. Don't check out if you're in a smooth patch of life, because while we can stand like a mighty oak in the face of a huge trial, we can crumble under the pressure of day-to-day trials, like raising teenagers, paying bills, the aches and pains of an aging body, the anxiety that comes with sending your little one off to overnight camp for the first time, or even into kids ministry. So don't miss the application to the mundane trials of life, as well as the big trials of life. So we know some trials can't be avoided, and David now has got himself into a situation that needs to be navigated. So let's take a look at what he does. He's taking his servants and he's fleeing, and he's going to meet a very unusual friend with an unusual name. So starting in verse 14, our passage, we see he's left Jerusalem, he's left 10 concubines to take care of the palace, and he's taken his servants with him, and he goes out a little ways, and he's now regrouping, mustering his troops, trying to figure out what to do. And in verse 18, he's inspecting his troops. And most of these are faithful followers, faithful soldiers of David who's been with him for a very long time. But we see in verse 19 an exchange with an interesting newcomer with the name of Ittai the Gittite. So Ittai the Gittite, let's pick that up in verse 19, where the king David says to Ittai the Gittite, "Why do you also go with us? Go back and stay with the king, with Absalom, for you are a foreigner and also an exile from your home. You came only yesterday, and shall I today make you wander about with us, since I go I know not where? You just came, go back to the king." Interesting that he refers to Absalom as the king. Right? So he's saying, Ittai, you just came, go home, you're not obligated to me, I don't know what's going on, I'm going to give you a pass. And he continues, "Go back and take your brothers with you, and may my Lord, may Yahweh show steadfast love and faithfulness to you." But Ittai answers to the king, to David, "As Yahweh lives and my Lord the king lives, wherever my Lord the king shall be, whether for death or for life, there also will your servant be." And David said to Ittai, "Go then, pass on." So Ittai the Gittite passed on with all his men and all the little ones who were with him. And all the land wept aloud as all the people passed by. And the king crossed the brook Kidron, and all the people passed on towards the wilderness. Wow, this passage shows David's heart and his concern for his men and what he values, right? The loyalty that he has. Ittai, he's a newcomer, right? He's just recently arrived, just yesterday, our passage says. And many of these men had been with David so far back into 1 Samuel, into when he was at Ziklag. So David wants to give Ittai an option to return home. But Ittai swears a loyalty oath on both David and on Yahweh, and commits himself to David. And this is an oath that rivals what we've seen in the Bible. This is like a Naomi and Ruth kind of loyalty oath. Wow, that's something. And then there's two key words that David uses when he prays for Ittai. He says he's wishing him steadfast love and faithfulness. Those are two great Bible words. Right? Steadfast love is the Hebrew word hesed. That's throughout the Old Testament. And faithfulness, amet. This is what David prays for the soldiers. This shows its heart. This shows what he values in the people around him. Right? Loyalty, steadfast love, and faithfulness. And we should value those as well. Christianity is a team sport, as Pastor PJ said and as Susan said. And we need to surround ourselves with people who are going to support us in difficult times. And we're going to see in our passage today that there are several groups of people that come along to support David. So point 2 on your outline is enlist the support of faithful friends. Enlist the support of faithful friends. We're not designed to go through trials by ourselves. We need to face trials as a team, not alone. And there's a biblical imperative for this in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 9. It's a familiar verse that starts in 4:9. Two are better than one because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him, oh no to him, bad news for him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Again, if two lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, two will withstand him. A threefold cord is not easily broken. We need people around us to support us, right? We can't go it alone because if we fall, there's no one there to pick us up, right? Our verse says we won't withstand. It's like the musk ox. Have you ever seen a musk ox? Maybe in the zoo. They live in Arctic climate, so I doubt we see them around here. But they're very shaggy, big kind of shaggy beasts with these curly horns. And when threatened, the musk ox form a circle, and they put the weaker and the more vulnerable animals in the middle of the circle, and then they stand around with their horns facing out. And it's called the circle of defense. And it's very effective against threats like wolves or grizzly bears. Well, what a great image for us when we think about developing a circle of Christian women to come around us and support us when we are weak and vulnerable, our own circle of defense in times of trial. I know a group of women who have been there for each other for over 30 years, that have prayed together and supported each other through life's ups and downs. And they've taken this to heart, the musk ox. They call themselves the muskies. And these muskies have been through some very difficult times together. They've laughed together, they've cried together, they've mourned together, they've rejoiced together. And I think that we need, as believers, to have our own circle of defense, right? You need to have your own musk oxen that you can rely on in times of trials. And it takes time and investment and intentionality. And if you don't have that, then you need to set about getting that. And I know it can be challenging, but you just can't sit back and wait for somebody to come to you. Can you imagine this room if everybody sat and waited for somebody else to reach out and make a connection? It would never happen. So you need to put yourself out there. Start making those deep, meaningful connections. And a great way to do that is to start serving. Some of my dearest friends I have met while serving together. As Susan Tweed said, women's Bible study is a great place to serve and meet like-minded women, or navigating motherhood, or kids ministry, or prayer ministry. Well, as we build this network of friends, it's interesting to compare some of the character traits of Absalom with that of Ittai, right? There is a friend that can share some of the character traits of Absalom that could be attractive, right? That worldly appeal. He's got the good stuff, right? He's got fine clothes, he's got a snappy car, he's got a chariot. He's a high roller, and he's at the great gate, and there can be a friend that is appealing because how you might benefit from that friendship, a friendship of association, if you will. He's also ingratiating. He has that ingratiating behavior. And there's a friend that can agree with you and feels kind of nice to have a friend like that who will tell you how great you look and how wonderful your kids are and that you deserve better from your husband. That appeals to your lesser nature. That falsely flatters you. When trials strike, those are not the kind of friends we want to have. Those are fair weather friends. They won't support you in trials, or worse, they'll offer the wrong kind of support in trials. So we need to have our 12, our close friends to support us. But then we also need a larger group. We need our church body, right? We are one here at Compass. We're a body. And if one member of the body is hurting, the entire body is hurting. We have to have that mentality, that corporate mentality. We're one team. We're Team CBC. So we need to come alongside each other. We need to ask, how are you doing? What's going on in your life? How can I pray for you? And it's hard when you're in a large church that's growing like this. How do you make those connections? Well, you make them through small groups. So the fact that you're here today and getting plugged into your group is an awesome thing. But if you're a flaky attender, you know who you are. You're missing out. Not only is your group missing out on your gifts and your support, but you're not making those meaningful connections for when you need support yourself. So you need to be intentional about coming to group, showing up, and making those connections. And then much as we need to be asking each other what's going on, we also need to be telling each other what's going on. Right? We can't just sit in a corner with a sad face and hope that somebody's going to ask us what's going on. What's wrong? That's wrong. We need to be transparent. We need to be out there about, hey, this is what's going on in my life. This is what I need you to pray for me for. So we need to ask as well as tell. Your leaders want to know, right? Your church body wants to know. They want to be praying for you. They want to be supporting you. There are experienced sufferers in our church body that you need to connect with if you're hurting. These are women who have been through trials that are further down the road that can share how they've endured, how they found hope in the midst of some deep, dark trials. So let's get back to our passage. Starting in verse 24, we're going to see two other friends that are going to come to David's help, Abiathar and Zadok. And we should note that these are two men from the household of faith, right? These are priests, these are Levites, these are people from David's church body. And he's known them as far back as 1 Samuel. So starting in verse 24, we see that Abiathar came up, and behold, Zadok came up also with all the Levites, bearing the ark of the covenant of God. And they set down the ark of God until the people had all passed out of the city. Then the king said to Zadok, carry the ark of God back into the city. If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, of Yahweh, he will bring me back and let me see both it and his dwelling place. But if he says, I have no pleasure in you, behold, here I am. Let him do what seems good to him. The king also said to Zadok the priest, are you not a seer? Go back to the city in peace with your two sons, Ahimaaz, your son, and Jonathan, the son of Abiathar. See, I will wait at the fords of the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me. So Zadok and Abiathar carried the ark of God back to Jerusalem, and they remained there. So Zadok and Abiathar think they're helping David. They're bringing the ark out. They're thinking they're going to give him some legitimacy to the throne. He's got the ark with him. Clearly, he should be the king. But David says, no, take that ark back to Jerusalem. And furthermore, while you're there, give me a little bit of intel, because I kind of want to know what's going on. Wow, things have changed since 1 Samuel, when they took the ark into the battle and they were going to try and use it as a good luck charm, as a lucky rabbit's foot. They were trusting in the ark versus God. And now David says, I'm not trusting in the ark, I'm trusting in God. He's putting his complete trust in God for the future and humbly submitting to God's will. When he says in verse 25, carry the ark of God back to the city. Right? If I find favor in the eyes of Yahweh, he'll bring me back. He'll bring me back to Jerusalem, and I'll see the ark, and I'll see Jerusalem again. But if he says, I have no pleasure in you, behold, here I am. Let him do to me what seems good. What a great example for us. So point 3 on your outline is leave the future in God's hands. Leave the future in God's hands. David doesn't know what's going on. Right? Will he ever see the ark again? Will he ever return to Jerusalem? He has no idea what's going to happen. Things are really messed up. But instead of freaking out, he's trusting in God for the future. His life has taken a gigantic detour. He's on the run again. His kingdom is under siege. But his response is humble. Right? In verse 26, he says, here I am. He's accepting God's judgment, whatever it is. That's a humble, servant-like, obedient response. It's reminiscent of Isaiah. And David remains calm, despite having a lot of reasons to freak out, right? His own misfortunes, the dangers that are facing him, that are facing his family, that are facing Jerusalem, the dishonor that's surely going to come to God as a result of this. But when faced with the option to give in to selfish desires and retribution, to take the ark and try and manipulate the outcome of the situation. He chooses to leave the future in God's hands. So how can we keep this perspective when our lives take a left turn? How can we confidently leave the future in God's hands? Well, we see David doing two things that can help us. One is submitting his request to God, and the other is accepting God's response, right? God's answer, God's will. So prayer and acceptance. Let's look at those two items, and there is a delicate balance between them. Right? Prayer is so important when we're going through trials. Right? That's our lifeline. We can't afford to let pain distract us from prayer. And we see David praying in verse 31, where he says, "Oh Lord, oh Yahweh, please turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness." We need to be seeking God even more in times of trials. As the old hymn goes, what a friend we have in Jesus. All our sins and griefs to bear. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. Oh, what peace we forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear. All because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. Have we trials and temptations? Is there trouble anywhere? We should never be discouraged. Take it to the Lord in prayer. I love that line, oh, what peace we forfeit, and oh, what needless pain we bear. We can carry unnecessary burdens during trials. We need to amplify our prayer time in trials, right? Increase our frequency, our focus, our fervency. If God feels far away during trials, chances are that's you who have moved. Right? David wrote in Psalm 34, Yahweh is near to the brokenhearted. We need to draw near to God through prayer in times of trials. And the author of that hymn was acquainted with trials. Joseph Scriven was born in Ireland in 1820. And as a young man, he fell in love and became engaged to a young lady. And on the eve of their wedding, as she was arriving in a carriage, the carriage tipped over a bridge and she drowned. Crushed and sorrowful, he wandered around and finally landed in Canada, where he again met another young woman, and he was planning on getting engaged to be married when tragedy struck again, and she died from pneumonia. He never married again. He spent the rest of his life serving others and died before this song became known around the world. We need to carry everything in prayer. But there is a tension between prayer and acceptance, right? Between what we want and what God answers. God encourages us to petition to change the things that we want to be different, right? To persevere, to trust that our prayers make a difference. But at the same time, we need to accept where we are, right? To find comfort during trials, find comfort in the deep valleys, to know that He is with us. Pastor Mike calls this confident flexibility. We must be confident that God hears our prayers, but yet we must pray if it's your will. Just like Jesus in Luke 22:42. Luke 22:42, where Jesus in the garden prays, Father, if you're willing, remove this cup from me, right? Change my circumstances. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. That's confident flexibility. We need this flexibility because we have blind spots, right? There's things that we can't see, things that we don't know. We can't always see God's will. We can't always see the spiritual battles that are going around us. And we certainly can't see the future. If you look back over your own prayer life, and you think about the times where you ask God to specifically fix a situation in a specific way, and then yet God answered in a different and better way. Well, I don't know about you, but my eyesight's not getting very good these days. I'm having a hard time reading, and I can't see far away, so I feel like I have double jeopardy. I'd love to have 20/20 vision. Wouldn't that be great to see everything super clear right in front of me? Well, when we're in trials, I maintain that we don't need 20/20 vision. We need 50/20 vision. You're like, 50/20 vision? What's that? That's Genesis 50/20 vision. When Joseph said to his brothers, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." So we need to adjust our perception, correct our perception to see God at work beyond our circumstances. God's eyesight is perfect, while we have blind spots. So we need to maintain that flexibility in our prayer life because God doesn't have any blind spots, right? He sees the end from the beginning. And it's that confident flexibility that allows us to accept God's will so that we can reach the place like David in verse 25 and 26, where he says, if I found favor in the eyes of Yahweh, he's going to bring me back and let me see the ark in Jerusalem again. And if I haven't, if he says, I have no pleasure in you, then let him do to me what seems good to him. That's confident flexibility. And when we reach that place of acceptance, we can worship God in the midst of trials because our worship isn't dependent on our circumstances. We don't worship God because he makes our lives easier. We worship him because he is the king of the universe. Right? He is our rock. He's our redeemer. Confident flexibility allowed David to praise God in trials, as recorded in Psalm 3, that was written when he fled from Absalom. Right? In Psalm 3, I love this. This is the title, Save Me, O My God. Just putting it right out there, right? That's a pretty clear request. Save me, oh my God. And he starts in verse 1. Oh Lord, oh Yahweh, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God. But then he remembers God's faithfulness and praises him. But you, O Lord, you, Yahweh, are a shield about me, my glory and the lifter of my head. I cried aloud to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy hill. And it ends in verse 8. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing be on your people. Well, it's interesting that David prays, but yet he just doesn't leave it there. He doesn't stop there. We see him calmly putting a plan of action together. He's getting to work. So looking again at verse 31, where David prays, O Lord, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. And then watch what happens next. While David was coming to the summit where God was worshipped, behold, Hushai the Archite came to meet him with his coat torn and dirt on his head. David said to him, if you go on with me, you'll be a burden to me. So David's downcast, right? His valued advisor, Ahithophel, has joined the rebellion. He's joined Absalom. He's thinking, what am I going to do now? And he prays to God to make the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness, right? To confound Absalom. And then all of a sudden, who shows up? But Hushai. Hushai, and you can tell he's in solidarity with David because his clothes, right? And the dirt on his head, he's in mourning. And David says to him, don't come with me because you're going to be a burden. And commentators think that maybe his age was going to be a burden. But David says, I have a better idea. Go back to Israel. Because what David really needs is he needs information. So he's going to send Hushai back. So let's pick up our verse again in verse 34. And he says, but if you return to the city and say to Absalom, I will be your servant, O king, as I have been your father's servant in time past, so now I will be your servant. Then you will defeat for me the counsel of Ahithophel. Are not Zadok and Abiathar the priests with you there? So whatever you hear from the king's house, tell it to Zadok and Abiathar the priests. Behold, their 2 sons are with them there, Ahimaaz, Zadok's son, and Jonathan, Abiathar's son. And by them you shall send to me everything you hear. So Hushai, David's friend, came into the city just as Absalom was entering Jerusalem. So he sets up Hushai as a mole, right, in Jerusalem as a double agent. So he's going to be in the palace. He's going to be hearing the strategies and getting information about what's going on with Absalom and what the rebellion is looking like. And then he's got set up this sort of messenger relay through Abiathar and Zadok and their sons. So he's basically set up a really effective ring of spies. And he's going to get information about what's going on. So it's important to note that during this trial, David's not paralyzed, right? He's taking action. He's wisely planning to right the situation. So point 4 on your outline is work to right the situation. Work to right the situation. David prays, but he doesn't leave it there. He prays, and then he starts to put a plan together with the resources that God has provided. Right? God works through David's decisions and his actions because David's motives are aligned with God's desire, right? With God's word. God said David would be king. So he's going about to right the situation, not seeking revenge or self-promotion. As we said, there's a tension between prayer and acceptance, but there's a tension between acceptance and action as well, right? That phrase, let go and let God, needs to be balanced with action, with planning to do the right thing. David's trusting in God, but he's doing everything he can to right the situation as well in a wise and planful manner. And we need to do the same. So you can't just sit on the couch if you've lost your job and say, woe is me, I've lost my job. God, I'm trusting you for a new job. No, you need to get off the couch and you need to start networking and put your resume together and apply to jobs and get out there, right? Take action. Or if you're struggling in your marriage, you can't say, oh, I sure hope things resolve themselves. No. You need to get into counseling. You need to get help. You need to take action. It's like my kids. When they were younger, and I'd say to them, clean your room or do your homework. That seemed to be the two themes. Clean your room, do your homework. And then they'd go away. And I'd come upstairs, and I'd see them sitting on their bed. And their room's a mess, or their homework's not done. And I'd say, I thought I said clean your room. And the answer would be, I know. You know? Seriously, like you know that's supposed to make me feel better? Like the fact that you know and you're not doing it is actually worse. Oh my goodness. Well, when we're in a difficult situation, more difficult than just a messy room, right? We need to pray and God is going to give us direction. And then we need to follow through. We need to work to right the situation. We can find ourselves in a situation where we know and not do, right? We can accept that our room is a mess, or our marriage, or our finances, and not do anything. Just sit there, and that's wrong. As I said to my kids, no to the point of doing. We need to know to the point of doing. Now, not every trial or situation can be fixed, and that's where acceptance and trusting in God for the future comes in. While David's not willing to use the ark to manipulate the outcome of the situation, he's not naive. He's proactive about putting together a strategy, and what he needs is information. So he sets up this ring of spies that becomes quite effective. He's not wallowing in self-pity. He's not paralyzed with fear. He's not seeking revenge. He's wisely setting about to make things right while seeking to follow God's direction. Right? It's not good to take rash action in crises. Right? That doesn't lead to a good end. We saw that in 1 Samuel with the ark. Right? They dragged that ark into battle, and it only made things worse. So David has a combination of faith and strategy. He prays to God, and then he wisely makes arrangements with Hushai. Our Christian journey has to encompass a blend of trusting God and wisely navigating the road that he has us on. Most of you have heard the song Blessings by Laura Story. She actually came here to Compass a couple times, and perhaps you even have heard the story behind the story. If you haven't heard that song, you definitely need to go and listen to it. But Laura Story's life was going great. She had written a #1 song that was being recorded by Tris Tomlin. She had married her handsome athlete husband. She had a new record deal, and she was nominated for a series of awards. When life changed, and her new husband was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and she watched him struggle to breathe and cope with memory loss, and her life had taken a huge left turn, a big detour. She wanted her old life back. And she shared that with her sister. She shared her desire to return to a normal, trial-free life. And her sister wisely replied, "Laura, I think this detour you're on is the actual road." Wow, what a difficult truth. But yet, as believers, if we are seeking God at every step of the way, there are no detours. There is no pain without purpose. The road that we are on, despite the bumps and the circumstances and the conditions, is the road that He has put us on, and we could not have made a wiser choice. That's a radical thought. When asked about the message of the song, she said, "There's a decision that I find God is asking us to make. Are we going to judge God based on our circumstances, or are we going to choose to interpret our circumstances based on what we know to be true about God?" Trials will come to every follower of Christ. We need to enlist the support of faithful friends. We need to trust the future to God. And then, where possible, wisely work to right the situation. We can say that trials are not good, but anything that makes us more dependent on God can be counted as a good thing. For what if those low points lead us to spiritual high points? Or as the Laura Story song Blessing says, what if your blessings come through raindrops? What if your healing comes through tears? What if 1,000 sleepless nights are what it takes to know God's near? What if trials of this life are your mercies in disguise? Let's pray. God, we praise you because you are a good God. You're a powerful God. You're an all-knowing and all-seeing God, that you see the end from the beginning, God, that there are no surprises to you. And you promise that you will use trials for good in the lives of those who love you and are called according to your purpose. So help us to rest in that, Lord. Help us not to give into fear or anxiety. Help us to be different. Help us to use that as a platform to showcase you and your goodness and your glory. I specifically pray, God, for the women in the audience that are going through trials, Lord, that you would encourage them, that you would minister to their spirit, that you would raise up people to come alongside and support them, God, that they would feel your presence in a tangible way. And Lord, I pray that you'd unite our hearts in this church body, God. Help us to support one another, to be transparent in our sharing, Lord, to love one another deeply. May this group time be transformative. May we have a deeper level of authenticity, a deeper level of sharing, a deeper level of transparency, sharing our struggles. Be working on these ladies' hearts right now, preparing for group time, Lord, that we would just be knit together more, to soften the rough spots, Lord, and to strengthen the weak spots, and to be more transformed into your image every day. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, thank you so much. You are dismissed.